Whoops. Oh, Ernie, now you're right in center stage, right into the live. Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome Wednesday, January 21st, 2020. Here in room 10, a joint hearing between the Senate Transportation and House Transportation to welcome Secretary Flynn, Agency of Transportation, to give us the overview of the budget. We heard a fair amount yesterday. Quite a bit of the budget speech was directed at transportation from the governor, and now I guess we're anxious to start to feel and paint in some more of the details. And thank you all very much for joining us, and for all of your members of your team. Senator Westman, if you'd like to add anything.
I think we'll let the secretary lead us through from a high level, so we have an idea of where we are.
Well, thank you very much, Chair Westman and Chair Buck. For the record, my name is Joe Flynn, Secretary of the Agency of Transportation. And with me today in the room, around the walls, are Ernie Tatnall, the Director of Maintenance, Jeremy Reed, Chief Engineer and Director of the Highway Division, Dave Thurber, the Director of the Fleet, and Michelle Boomhauer, the Director of Policy Planning and Intermodal Development, Jana Morris, the Director of Administration, and Stonquist, the CFO, and Andrew Collier, the Commissioner of the Department of Motor Vehicles. I believe that's everybody. If I'm missing anyone, oh, I was going to say Mike Smith, but that's former Deputy Commissioner Smith threw a curve at me by being in the room. That's anyway, nice to see you. Excuse me. All right. As the chair said, we're going to walk through this at a very high level, and I know that our members start to agree from committees following this. So I will go through it, and as always, it's the chair's desire whether you stop and ask questions as well, or how you should handle it. I'll If you go right to page slide 2, you will read it. We're coming in at $934.7 million. This is the largest budget in the agency history, with an increase of almost $50 million over last year. The budget overview on the next page shows the different fund sources on the left-hand column. The 26 has passed, the Gov's Rec for 27, the ups and the downs. I do want to get out of the way immediately what I believe is probably the biggest question on everybody's mind. And that is that the budget that I am presenting to you today before you does represent 31 reductions in force at the Agency of Transportation. And in the budget, that has captured $4.1 million in savings. Of those 31 positions, 19 of those are actually filled with employees, and 12 of them are vacant. Of the 19, of the entire 31, 8 of those positions are in administration. 20 of the positions are in district maintenance. 2 are in the highway divisions, and 1 is in policy planning and intermodal development. There are no planned reductions in force at the DMV or at Central Garage Fleet. Certainly, I know there'll be much conversation about that, but I wanted to just air that immediately as I sit before you today. So with that, moving to, we built a budget based on specific savings. Due to the collective bargaining agreement, we cannot say exactly how many positions are impacted in each division. I laid out what I laid out, but the way that it works, and many of you heard this last year when we came before you as a result of the revenue downgrade live, we talked about some reductions then. The position numbers that have been identified by us are then reviewed by labor relations in concert with the contract and the SCA. Some employees will have status, what they call status, and some employees will have RIF rights, which means that they have a right to another open position, either at AOT or somewhere else in state government. So it doesn't necessarily mean that each person separates from employment. But because of that process, and that is not a process that we manage, that's managed between labor relations. And then the language in the contract regarding RIF rights has to do with the person's length of service, et cetera. So while I indicated what the numbers could be in each area, that can move somewhat. And the target number is baked into the budget though, so it's I hate to say it's a work in process, but nothing I say, I intend to sound callous about it, repeating its job. But at this point, our duty is to inform labor relations, and they take it from there. That's the message that I need to give. The $331 million in T-Fund does include $10 million being proposed on the governor's as recommended budget yesterday. Moved to the agency from the purchase and use tax. And of course, because that is coming in on the T-Fund side or state dollars, that amplifies work we'll be able to do because we can draw down federal money. We can go through that later, and certainly when Chief Engineer Reed's team testifies to projects, you'll hear more about that. On the federal side, the increase in $63 million that you saw in the prior slide is attributed to that $10 million, and that's what that brings us down in total. So, so with the $10 million, 93% of that is intended to go to federal highway aid projects, and 7% will go directly to maintenance in the way of brush and tree cutting to continue some of that roadside maintenance that we've been trying to accomplish for the last 4 or 5 years. And you'll notice too on that slide, one other, there's an $11 million reduction that primarily attributed to fewer flood projects from 2024 projects just becoming completed. The TIB fund reduction accounts for right sizing of the TIB budget. The 26 GovRec proposed TIB appropriations based on the 24 consensus. And with a fund transfer from the TF to TIB, count to January 25 downgrade, and 27, the governor's rec, we are reducing TIB appropriations simply to match the consensus. So that's the reason you see that reflected. And again, on that list, there's no remarkable change in sector law. Moving to slide 4, this slide is the pie chart that you're all used to seeing. This basically just shows where the source of revenues in our budget come from. Slide 4 on my deck, but that's not the slide on it's the
Pie chart.
pie chart.
Okay. That's
the second pie chart.
You're going earlier.
If you have a pretty.
There we go.
Yeah, two of them go bye-bye.
So again, I think most of you are familiar with the pie chart. Shows where our money comes from. Obviously, the largest piece of this is the Federal Highway Administration. State Transportation Funds is the second down in the lower right-hand quadrant. Obviously, you know, that's basically all the money that we raise to the Department of Motor Vehicles. Other federal funds, those are Federal Transit Administration, Federal Aviation Administration, Federal Railroad Administration, and the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, the primary other federal funders that come to us. So, and then local and other sources, there's some FEMA money, and there's ex-local match money for some of the grant that we put out. So that's basically how we derive the money that we propose to spend in this 27 budget. Then moving to slide 5. Again, I mentioned this a moment ago, but the submission of the 27 budgets includes weaning off from the purchase and use tax. In other words, the third of the purchase and use tax that has been going to the Ed Fund from transportation for decades. We are proposing that began to reduce, as initially the JPOC transfer for years was much higher, and at some point, perhaps 15 or more years ago, and I know there are some senators and representatives in the room or former representatives who remember this, the JTOC transfer that went to public safety was set in motion to decline in increments, I think, of $5 million over a number of years to a floor of $20,250,000, where it stayed for quite a few years. And then last year, you agreed to transfer that to DOT. So this proposal sets the same in motion for the balance of the purchasing use, the third of purchasing use that goes from transportation to ed. And it would ramp this down in increments of 10 million over the next 5 fiscal years. That's basically what that shows on that slide. You know, I know we sat in this room when we were here in September about the revenue downgrade. And I do believe it's important that I understand that there's an awful lot of play here. And I spoke with some of the committee members that day in September. I understand that this is part of the education reform discussion. And I understand not only as a person who sits before you in the cabinet, but as a property taxpayer in my town of South Bureau and a dad of 3 kids, 8 that come from a good school as well in this state, that it's a complex circumstance. That's not lost on me. But what we are saying is that I think together, and this was really the tone and the words of the governor yesterday, we all have to figure out where we go from here. And the point I'm here to make today as the Secretary of Transportation, because it's my responsibility to do that, and I believe that, is that the transportation fund, you all have said too, for over a year, and even many of you before that there is, you know, a sustainability problem going forward. And when a third of the funds that are available for transportation are diverted anywhere, that's not an ed speech, but when they're diverted anywhere, and at the same time, simultaneously, we have a growing concern about sustainable funding for transportation, it's responsible for me as secretary to just call that out. And again, that's just it's a fact-based statement. So it's important that this be launched and that over time, working together, we get the funding from purchasing use back to the transportation fund where it's now needed versus, as the governor referred to yesterday and stated, when these were identified 40 years ago, I believe in 1991 stated, funds were basically lopsided, they were balanced. The T fund was flush and the general fund needed a tremendous infusion of cash. So between the T fund and some income tax increases at that time, they were able to come through that. But here we are. So again, I understand this process that launches today, and it's deliberatory between both committees and the entire legislature. But this is where we stand. Fully support. So moving to the next pie chart. This is where we spend the money. And, you know, again, you can just take a look at this, but you'll see that there are some primary buckets that are similar in size. One thing I want to point out, one of the first things I want to point out is state paving. You will see up there $148 million. That is a significant change within the last 30 days. And that is primarily due to the fact that the governor is proposing $10 million purchase use. If not for that 10 million, which we are amplifying some projects to come under federal aid paving and then others under state paving, we wouldn't be at the 148. And we have a list of the projects that are directly attributable, and I believe they are spread across 11 counties in the state. These are above and beyond what we saw our budget. I apologize. It seems like I've got people behind me and I don't need to not look at you. But there are, I believe it's 11 projects all told, or maybe not, sorry, I think it's 16 all told, that weren't in our budget even 3 weeks ago, even 2 weeks ago, because of the $10 million. And then what we can do with that $10 million by bringing federal money down from many of those projects. So, and again, the spread is very similar every year, just slightly different size wedges. Interstate bridge, roadway safety, bike and ped, winter maintenance. It is what it is, and I'm happy to answer any questions on it. The next slide, program development budget. This just gives you a snapshot of the breadth of the construction program going forward in the budget that we are proposing. Paving projects, interstate bridge projects, highway bridge project, roadway, traffic, safety, park and ride, bike and ped, transportation alternatives, and one rest area in the program at this time. City up and the downs from the chart on your left. We anticipate 151 miles of paving with a budget of $148 million. What the current rough price we pay per mile and the type of treatment based on the different projects. And overall, 249 construction projects across all 14 counties of Vermont. Not 249 in every, but construction projects totaling 249, and they will be spread across all 14 counties of Vermont. The district maintenance and fleet budget, again, really just reflects the basic category of the work done, district maintenance that you have before you. Next slide is policy, environmental and intermodal development. Again, just some of the roll up here on the right. I think I mentioned this when I was in a couple of weeks ago, but it's important that we talk about just momentarily the involvement that we have as an agency with all of the towns across Vermont. And every town that you represent in this room would have had conversations with the agency. The agency would have worked with your towns on different projects. 238 towns actively had a degree of involvement. We had an involvement with 238 towns of different things that they were doing. We don't quantify that in a dollar value, but I do believe that because it's not easily identified when we get to the last page of this, which many of you have already looked at, and I get it. But it's an effort. It's an effort, and behind every effort is a cost, but it's important. It's important work. And you see down through here everything, and I won't read them all. It's a very small font, very small, but just from the 1111 permits that we issue that have to do with either residential or commercial development, speaks to the environmental systems, the electric vehicle charging systems, it speaks to the rail trails. There's a lot in that shop, and this slide just depicts the work on the right and then the ups and downs on the left. Public transit, you see that ridership, this is statewide, this is not one of the particular providers. Statewide ridership is still below what it was last year. Different providers are having different experiences. Some providers are up, some providers are down. It does continue to support the micro transit service that you see across several communities. It does address some extra awarding to CMT. There've been obviously many conversations about DMT. Mobility and Transportation Initiative grant programs. There have been federal aid, state funds that have been granted. And in the case of the Northwest, up where I live, RTC is taking over the rural transit from DMT. So, that's been an initiative that's just recently underway. So there's a lot happening in transit. Of course, Ross McDonald will be in to testify to that more in depth. The next slide is administration, transportation buildings and the transportation board. Let me just start with the transportation board. Under statute, it goes in the agency of transportation. It's in our budget. It's on an org chart. It is totally separate. We don't influence the transportation board. It has an executive secretary, and then it has a board chair and members of the board that are appointed by the governor. But it's in our budget. And then as far as the administration division, I mentioned before the reductions in that group. And they basically just manage the administration of the agency. Transportation buildings, I want to take a moment just to level set regarding the central garage reconstruction on the Payne Turnpike. That is not in our budget because the money for that resides really in the budget with the Agency of Administration, managed through Chief Recovery Officer Doug Farnham, because those are FEMA dollars and they have to be walled off. And they cannot be used for anything but FEMA recovery for that facility because we accepted the award that was granted, that was offered for that facility. So that is not in our budget. You'll see that in the big bill because obviously there has to be authority granted to sell. And then we move to Department of Motor Vehicles. And you see there is an up at the Department of Motor Vehicles. I think again, the story here is that since we all have met, well, obviously we met a couple of weeks ago to talk about the accomplishments, and I mentioned it as well then, but you know, officially in this joint committee, I want to just reemphasize, as Vermonters, you should be very proud, I hope, and as legislators and people who, you know, govern the checkbook, you should be pleased with the work that was accomplished by the Agency of Digital Services, the Department of Motor Vehicles, and the contractor Fast Enterprises, who have delivered the monumental software upgrade to DMV, one that I have said before goes back to the COBOL era, which I know looking around this room probably predates some people in the room. It was done, and it was completed. It was completed on time and on budget, and it's operational. And the work doesn't stop there. Things like the e-permitting program, which is really independent of the core system upgrade, or internally referred to as the Vermont Hall Pass, HAUL. So for those of us who pulled up that, they've got the Hall Pass. If you were in high school, it's a little play on words there, but where heavy haulers can go online and get their permits in a much expedited fashion. And it also has a degree of predictability about routing. Things like the deployment of kiosks within the buildings, so that a Vermonter walking into the building or somebody new to Vermont walking into the building who may have a registration, a reservation, or may not have a reservation for service, also to go to the kiosk. And we're looking to employ more of that. So we hear more of that from the commissioner starting this morning. But a lot of actually good things that I know with former Deputy Commissioner Smith in the room and former Commissioner Manoli in the room, that all of these initiatives were started in their tenure. And we should be proud of the accomplishments as well. And this does then lead to town highway programs. I know that this is probably among the more important slides of note for all of you. It's a down. The downs often reflect, as you've heard all of us say before, available projects as well. So at this time, we must manage the funds we have, the projects that are ready. We have to also take into account the condition of the varying degrees of projects in the entire portfolio and fund those across the spectrum, whether they're town projects or state projects, based on need, based on condition. I know there'll be a lot of discussion about this, and you know, it meets all the statutory requirements of the funding that we were required to provide, and that's the summation of the slides of the presentation. So I know that was a really fast run through. And perhaps my experience, the most beneficial portion of our time with you today is the dialogue that we have, the comments and concerns that we take away, the responses that we provide. So I guess I would officially.
Senator White has a question.
Yes, Senator.
Thank you so much, Secretary Flynn, for coming and presenting to us, and I appreciate some of the clarity. So I just want to make sure I understand the firings that you're going to be doing. So you had 24 folks, is my understanding, who were let go due to the rescission plan, and this is an additional 31 folks. So is that a total of 55 employees or positions that will no longer exist in AOT, or am I? What's the Venn diagram of people who are losing their jobs?
You know, they're in the first round, they were 26, I believe.
Oh, so, okay.
And I don't know as I recall, they were not all filled. There were vacancies of that group. We can get to that number.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the math would You add 31 to that number.
Okay, so so there's, okay, so about
Reduction in force.
57 Vermont AOT positions have been eliminated
That would be,
this year.
that's the way the math works out. 31 is in this budget, that is correct.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Do you have identified which districts? Because you noted, I think it was, you had a list of what district garages you were cutting from that total. Do you know what garages you're cutting from?
We know what's represented in the 4.1, but the exercise, as I laid out before, really now today starts with labor relations, BSEA, and who has birth rights and who has status, so that can change. That's not a definite at this time.
Okay, so it's not like you've identified District 2 or District 4, we're gonna cut 5.
We are not
District.
doing it that way.
Okay, I appreciate that clarity. And then my only other question, just at a high level, and then I would get into the details. Thank you for the white book. You noted that it's important for us to move the purchase and use tax back to the T fund because it would create sustainability. But my understanding from Joint Fiscal Office is the purchase and use tax is declining and is really volatile during recessions, for example. Do you think it's a good decision for us to try to put that money as the sustainability driver for the T fund when we're seeing volatility and continued decline there as well?
I think the way I would answer that is the factual math is that in the last 5 fiscal years, $220 million has been diverted out of the T fund. So that's would speak to sustainability. And over the lifetime of the purchase and use tax declared, it's over $700 million that has been taken from transportation. So I would offer that there's a strong likelihood we wouldn't be in a situation of over sustainability had that money not been diverted from transportation all along. And especially over the last 5 fiscal years, because $220 million of state money, if you do that math at about an 85-15 split, that would provide the ability to bring down more federal money than there is to bring down at this time. So my answer is really, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah,
and
it's still going down,
purchase and use will fluctuate, gas continues to decline. But structurally, you don't just wake up one day and find yourself in a structural, sustainable situation. It's something that's happened over time. So I contend that in part, for all the good reasons why it was diverted when it was diverted, over time, it has led to where we are today. So we need to get that back. And again, in the real time, in the time that we've been here, and many, if not most of you have been here, 220 million has been diverted from transportation. So I do believe that it responds to the question that you posed in an appropriate way, that it is sensible to use that money and to suggest that that money offset any other fluctuations. Now, it's not the end all and the be all of what we might do in the future, but it's fundamental to predictability. It's fundamental to our ability to draw down more federal money. And if you have to recall too, we are now in the last few months before we learn what reauthorization will look like, which comes in 2026 October. That's the federal reauthorization. That's the 5-year exercise Congress goes through and has gone through for 35, 40 years, I believe, since the Eisenhower administration, where they derive the formula money that we get every year. And so we don't yet know what that will look like, but being more well suited to have more state dollars at hand, starting July 1st of this year, should this pass, puts us in a much better position if there's an increase or even if there's a static circumstance with reauthorization. $220 million is $220 million.
Representative McCoy?
Yes, thank you for your presentation. So if I'm understanding correctly, did you say 57 positions since July 1 of this year?
Well, 31 now, and I believe it was 26.
26. Okay. So of those positions, are any of those historically unbilled positions? So when we're talking about rep, how many like physical funds?
There
Is it
are.
57, is it the total amount? Or
And we can correct this if, Director Morris.
Secretary, if I may,
Oh, right, I did not hear that.
for the record, Jana Morris, Director of Administration for Transportation. So in our fiscal 26 expenditure reduction plan, we eliminated 31 total positions. Of those, 3 were permanent classified, 25 were limited service as part of the Infrastructure Jobs Act. And 3 had already been unfunded as part of the fiscal 26 budget. So they were originally not counted in the numbers that I had provided in my original testimony, which were subsequently corrected by John Berard and recognized during that testimony that afternoon. Of those 31 positions, 15 were vacant and 16 were filled. So of the 31 positions we have this time, 19 are filled and 12 are vacant. So that's our overall.
So 62
summary.
people.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It gets written down, so I'm confused.
There's some confusion about
Yeah.
particularly the numbers from the fall
Yeah,
From the fall.
and the rescission piece.
maybe we could get like an email with it. Because you just said there's 31 positions from the rescission plan, or is this, so it's actually 62 people that are being?
Total,
Positions.
from the fall.
Okay.
positions.
Maybe we could get just like a little chart to
And you
understand.
have those are vacant to the question, the staff.
Maybe we could just get that written out somewhere, because I hear lots of competing numbers from different folks, so.
Well, you just heard the 31 and 31, and when I spoke a moment ago, I said I thought it was 26, but
Yeah.
I stood corrected. So it's 30.
So I guess if we could just get written down, that would be really
You can write
helpful, I
that down
guess.
before
Yeah,
you
that would just be.
Representative McCoy, you still had the floor if you were set with your question. Okay. Secretary, what's the total FTE or total headcount or both in the
I
agency?
believe it's like 1,322 is what we're authorized for.
1,322.
No, it's vacancy. That's got for us.
Do you have a ballpark of the amount of vacancy?
Probably like 1250, 1260.
I'm sorry,
Our current-
number of vacancies.
No, the current roster of employees. As far as
1,300.
we're authorized for 1322, I think, where are we? Roughly around 1250, 1260. It ebbs and flows every day.
Sure.
People retiring, independent of this, people coming on board.
I was just looking for a ballpark of,
Right.
we have about 100 vacancies in the
A
currently.
little bit less of it, it's probably close.
Okay, and we have authorized, the budgeting authorized at 1,322, 1,300 plus employees across the entire state,
Right, and that includes the,
including the union. Okay, thank you. Representative Corcoran, I'm sorry.
Just had a quick question.
Vlad Corcoran and then Senator.
About
Cruz.
the 33 million shortfall, I have 10 from the purchase and use, roughly 4 million from layoffs. Where's the 18? Can you walk me? Is that project delays or how do we get to the
are
18?
you referring to where we started? Building the 27 budget? 'Cause-
Yeah, it was 33 million. So I'm just trying to put that piece together.
Welcome.
Sure.
If I may, Candace Office, Chief Financial Officer, I have a slide deck that I'm to provide to HTC today at 1:30.
Okay.
That walks us from the 33 million to where we are right now.
All right, I'll withhold my question.
Large bulk of that was one times, but.
One time, okay.
My apologies, Senator.
No apologies needed. Thank you, Secretary. On slide 6, you talk about the stabilization reserves being used. And maybe I missed this coming in late. I just wondered if you could walk, or maybe it's Candace, walk through this use of the stabilization reserves. And then what is your level of confidence that that reimbursement for the floods that was denied is going to come through? This is, I'm assuming that the July 24 floods is, oh, that's the July, is that the Kingdom floods from last year? I think so.
Senator, I take this question. So this slide that references the July 24 reimbursement, my apologies on this, that is out of date. The the transfer amount that we're giving to the stabilization reserve in the 27 budget fully funds the 5% maximum. So we decided to go with finding funds in the FY 27 GovRec because that's a more stable figure. And yes, this 26 construct, basically borrows from the stabilization reserve temporarily until we fully fill in 27.
And you're feeling you're gonna fill that with that reimbursement from the feds?
No, it's contained within our 27 budget construct. My apologies.
So if that money comes in, that's just gonna help you
Correct, yeah.
following fiscal years. Okay. I think I find that, but I also have a question, if it's okay with the chairs, on slide 9 about the maintenance reduction. And again, apologies if you talked about this before. Just what is gonna be, what's the reaction on the ground of a 4% reduction in the maintenance budget? I know in past years when the committees have talked about smaller reductions in maintenance, it's been met with very strong concerns about what that means to our maintenance. And then also kind of related, how's it looking this year? Or you think you're gonna be over?
Let me address the first part. We'll talk about the second part. The reduction you're seeing is primarily, the reduction due to the positions.
Okay.
I had mentioned 20. So that's basically it. We have, we've not cut winter maintenance. It's mostly positions. Now, that said,
It's people that do the maintenance.
right now, I know Director Patton was sitting behind me, but as of last week, we were running about 25% hot on salt tons deployed. We are not in a problem situation at this time. Salt was moving from the port of Portsmouth, New Hampshire this weekend into Vermont. I've met with the trucking companies, I've met with the railroad. I think it's fair to say that if the type of winter we're all having across Vermont continues, there will be concern, at the town level as well. But it's hard to predict. Winter certainly started out with a fury faster this year. Actually, last calendar year, November and all of a sudden. So, we are ahead of the pace last year, but we really never know what the whole season will look like. I don't think it's going to taper off. I think it's going to continue. I mean, the forecasts said that.
So weekend doesn't look good.
So far, we are.
I guess my concern is we're gonna have this cut and we're also gonna need more money for this fiscal year.
We're currently in a situation where we can manage this fiscal year, but again, that depends on where winter takes us. And that's not indifferent from every year, it's just this year, there's not a lot of margin.
So what did you say, the reduction of the 31 total positions, how many are in maintenance?
20 are intended to be in consent.
Okay, thank you. Representative Burke?
I'm just looking at the town highway programs and the percentage decrease in town highway, really particularly in the toll mitigation program. Could you speak to that? I'm just, that my town is really financially seeing a reduction in any highway programs.
In particular, I think we with a couple of larger bridge projects in towns that have completed. So again, you feel obliged to obviously finish the projects that are in play, and you feel obliged to do everything we can to fund the projects that are ready to go. When a project ends and the spending stops, it's reflected in the budget, so it looks like there's nothing weighing down, but you read may have a little more detail on some of those projects, but much of it is that.
He's on the other side.
Yeah, right here, Jeremy Reed, Chief Engineer. So a lot of it has to do just with the cyclical nature of projects being ready and going. There was also a significant portion of money with the IIJA that provided for a 100% funding for what's called office and bridges, and those would be very restricted to projects that we're not on system, we're not on a state route. And so we have basically expended that money on those projects. Some examples recently would be like BA Cutoff Road. There's a couple bridges in Stowe recently. And so I think we did 12 to 15 off-system bridges, 100% federal. And that would have shown up within that Conti Bridge program. So if we look back 2, 3, 4 years, you saw it decline, and that was one of the principal drivers of that.
Remember that program.
Representative Powell?
Yeah, I guess I'll just weigh in. I'm, concerned about funding for municipalities and the town highway bridges all grant. And the highway, class 2 road is a formula that gets them there. So that's gone according to the formula, I assume. And the other one, I just want to note that anytime the towns need additional funds for their roadways, that comes right out of property tax. And so if we're really concerned about property tax, the town right now really struggling, and the only place they can get funds to maintain their roads is directly on property tax of the local folks. So, I'd want to look deeply into this to see how that funding is gone down and ensuring we don't leave municipalities sort of holding the bag.
If I could, Chair. So the statutory formulas are met. The town highway bridge program doesn't have a formula.
It's a grant.
That is the grant.
White? I don't want to miss anybody.
Thank you. And I just want to acknowledge, I appreciate these cuts are not easy, and so thank you for the work and just recognize that it's a little painful, the process. But my question is more big picture. I'm looking at slide 2, AOT budget over the last 9 fiscal years. And just seeing fiscal year 2022, 686 million. Here we are 5 years later, 40% higher of 934 million. And I see your notation, the increase in the budget is due to the IIJA. And some of the staff cuts you were sharing with us, you said were IIJA positions. So I'm just recognizing that there's some, opportunity for making cuts there in positions. My question is, what other categories increase substantially with the IIJA to kind of get to such a big increase 5 years later? And I also heard Jeremy speaking about some bridge projects which were expensive, which were IIJA, and we also know that construction costs have gone up significantly. So, but other big items that were in that IIJA.
Well, that's an excellent question. Thank you. On IIJA brought $572 million more dollars to Vermont. So that's a big portion of that delta that you call out. And then in addition, there are several things, but primarily for us as a business, if you will, every year we are obliged, understandably, to meet the contract increases that are negotiated with the VSCA. So we have to meet that. We have equal phase, which is being us to bill for services that are provided to us. We have term fees for things like our portion of ADS, Agency of Digital Service, which is the universal umbrella of IT defense and support for our agency. That weren't necessarily provided by ADS. When I started in 2009, and I started, who have seen that. So those are some, really key things every year that we get. It's sort of like in a household, if the heating cost goes up, you have flexibility in any. So we have to meet the contract increase across the board. Then we have to meet the increases given to us you know, for the typical management of the agency, not our own management, but given to us. So I think those are really the biggest drivers. And then, you know, what you also see is just construction related cost increases because the federal investments in Vermont reflect those as they. But as you heard in testimony previously, and we'll hear again, in particular, Chief Reed has been saying that, you know, construction costs, in fact, that was heard in Senate testimony prior to Christmas. There was an individual, two individuals from that organization that supported our numbers that construction is 40 to 60% higher now than it was 35 years ago nationwide. So we're feeling that in the community. So, but I think the biggest leap, because you're right. I mean, when I started, the budget was just approaching 600 million, but it's a lot of money. It's not lost on me that it's not approaching today. And it's costs everywhere go up, and we have to meet those costs, but there are certain costs that are not in our control as well. I hope that attempts to answer the question satisfactorily.
So to play off from that a little bit, the overall spending is up roughly 50 million, give or take a tiny bit. And if you go to the next page on that, it's really due to the 14% increase in federal funds comes.
Well, it's also due to the fact factoring in the $10 million, which we're able to amplify federal money.
When you get to the bottom line in this, and I totally appreciate and quite happy that the administration has opened the door to have the discussion about the purchase and use tax and presented that. I don't know how anybody would put together a budget without that increase. And I think it's something that you know, some of us have been calling that for ages, and I think most of the transportation committees here. So we really appreciate that and we recognize that. But the up in here is 14% federal, and almost every other line, even with the 10 million, is down a little. And when I go to the program development page, I can see that the overall increase, 50 million increase in this in program development is interstate bridge and paving. It will be very interesting for me to see how much of this is interstate in paving and how much of this is of the 44 projects is regular state. I know the match is higher on the interstate side, and I know interstates are important. But what I would hope is that what we're not doing is keeping up with the interstate and everybody else in this state highways and the municipals all are seeing, you know, a little adverse position in this. So I will be looking when everyone comes into Senate appropriation. Because I really, you know, I'm going to speak personally. I see this in tiers. I see the interstate system as a class by itself because they get the highest match rate. And I see our state highway system, which is where most people most Vermonters access every day. And then the feeders to that, the town systems. I would hate to see that system, the ones that are 80-20 match, and the municipals not get some of the benefit of the new money coming in that we need.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And certainly interstates are in a class by themselves because amidst all of that complex managing of condition that you so readily pointed out, Senator Westman, we have also the obligation imposed on us by USDOT to make sure that we keep the interstates to a certain level.
Yeah.
So we must meet a certain level while recognizing everything you just gratefully said and then address all of the rest of that on a needs basis, as they're prioritized. So it lends to the complexity.
Yep.
And the very keen programming that has to occur in project delivery and the highway shop.
I would just say to the pressure from our point of view that, and coming from a county where we don't have an interstate.
Right.
But I think for most of us, a lot of us, our constituents, don't travel on the interstate every day.
No,
It's the state highway and their municipal roads that get,
I would say that of the 10 million, we're talking at least the 10 million.
Yep.
4 of those are interstate. What we get for that when we amplify the federal line, 4 of those are interstate paving projects, 5 are state highway paving projects, to your point. 7 are state highway bridge projects. So there are some state paving projects that can be done in this budget as recommended that would not be done in the budget as recommended. It's not full.
well,
But that's not the entire reality.
when I see a $50 million increase and I see paving and interstate bridge make up about 50 million, that
Well, I guess I would have to add my 2 cents on that. The committees and the legislature went last year's T-bill to make sure that town highway aid and under pieces of the formula funds were reviewed and would move up in terms of an inflation rate. And that does put additional pressure on T funds, but it does put some relief. And if that had been in place over years, we wouldn't be as nearly in the position in town highways as we are now, because that had been flat funded for over a decade, I believe. So there is some increase there, but it's hard to view that page and see an overall decrease in activity. And I know that was mentioned, and we're going to see some significant more testimony on that so that we can help our constituents and our towns understand that. Because it was certainly the intention of our committees and in the T fund last year that we would bring some additional relief to our towns through all that, a small step. And the result of that in this year, where we were hoping to see some sort of an increase in that activity, there's a decrease. So we are going to have to, and I know you have to do it, we're going to need to see a significant amount of really making sure that our towns and municipalities understand what's going on and the fluctuation of a year by year issue in projects itself. Because I'm pretty sure that we're unanimously committed to finding help for our towns in the same way that we needed help for our state highway piece. And I'm glad that the committees have known it for a long time, and many in the building have, and all of you have. Obviously now it's statewide, and everybody in Vermont knows the trouble that we have in transportation funding. And I appreciate your effort to understand how that increase or an effort is split. So that particular part that we went quite far to make sure increased does appear as an overall net backwards. And we really got to make sure that the public understands that and what we're actually happening there, because it is our intention to provide more relief, not less.
I certainly understand that. I do want to, it doesn't address the golden part of what you said, Representative Walker, but I mean, we are meeting the statutory obligations. So what we're talking about is beyond the statutory obligation. And second of all, I think it actually, it does, some degree, as I see it, sort of support my response to Senator White earlier about the importance of having this discussion about purchase and use, especially in the last few years. If you look at $220 million, if it weren't, and I'm not suggesting that everything would be unicorns and jelly beans, but what I'm saying is, if $220 million from the peak fund hadn't been diverted within the last 5 years, and that's a frame of time we all can relate to. It's a possibility that could have also had some impact on the towns. And then I've said this before, both committees before, and I said here before you today, saying it as well. Every one of us in this room live in a town. Every one of us in this building live in a town, and every one of us pay town taxes or city taxes, and we have a municipal budget or a town highway budget, and I do in my town. It's nearly $900,000 in South Arrow. So I totally understand, and I know, you know, Josh is in the room, we used to work together in the cabinet and with the LCT, and totally understand it. It's a difficult question, because as I've said before, at this time, regardless of what the budget proposal is, you're talking about a finite sized circle at some point here. It's just, I'm a simple guy. This is the way I see it, and correct me or help me if I'm articulating this wrong. But you have a certain size pie, and we're talking about changing the size of the slices. So no one is disagreeing, and Representative Townsend rightfully brought this up as well. No one is disagreeing about the reality towns are facing, especially after 3 years in some cases up in the Northeast Kingdom of flooding and having to bridge FEMA money or having to meet the match. But even that aside, increasing pressures, everything we sat here to talk about, the 40 to 60% construction increases towns are facing as well. But if you change the slices of that finite pie, then some of the other slices get smaller. So we have to talk about what other slice are you comfortable with giving? That's all. And you know that. I mean, it's paving, it's road condition, it's bridge deterioration, it's winter maintenance. It's and the answer is not simple. It's never simple, but it can't be, well, I don't support airports, so let's take that money from airports. You can't do that. The federal government, long before current administration, has siloed that money out. You can't cross-pollinate it. You can't cross-pollinate the money from rail. It's got to go where it's intended to go by Congress through USDOT. So we are talking about the FHWA funding to us. Now, the rest of those programs are tremendously important. I'm simply saying, though, you see all of that in this budget, but that money is not able to be inserted into this conversation as point of view. So it is a confounding reality, and I agree with you.
I guess I would have to add on that, the direction of the conversation, our number of highway miles and town miles and our number of highway bridges in town is never shrinking. It's the same as it's been, and that's not in the funding conversation on how we spend in other areas. Perhaps reminding that some of those areas are shrinking, but your challenge every day never changes. The amount of miles is never going to go down.
That's right.
And the amount of bridges that need work is never going to go down. And this weather that deteriorates it every day is never going to go down. So our collective effort to provide this most basic service to Vermonters, our challenge is never decreasing.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate where you're coming from. And if the criticisms in those areas is only a matter of where we represent and fighting for our piece of that particular pie, and the challenge in this room never decreases. We do not have a shrinking highway mileage or a shrinking highway bridge challenge. So thank you. I appreciate your challenges. What you're under there.
You know I'm the administration guy sitting here. I believe what I'm going to say. I believe it as a lifelong Vermonter, a 70-year-old guy who's proud to be born and raised here. We've got to prioritize what we already collect and spend. You know, there was a really healthy conversation in this room in August or September about the July revenue downgrade. Some of you were in that committee. And it was well articulated. And it was truly a bipartisan conversation, which really gave me some encouragement about realizing the situation. There was no brinksmanship, I felt. In fact, you can go back and look at that. And I spoke with some people after that who I really, in my travels as the secretary or in my previous careers in state government, had not been before their committees. And there was common ground understanding about that. So I'm not suggesting any particular program is unavaluable program, but I am suggesting, based on everything you're saying here today, everything that's been said all throughout last year when this conversation really got real, and then what was discussed in summer, late summer regarding the downgrade. Everything you're raising as concerns, from the town needs money to the costs we're increasing, the basic costs that we have every year, your question, Representative White, lead to one outcome. I think it's an undeniable reality, no matter where we sit, and that is transportation is probably one of the most fundamental responsibilities of government. Public safety has to be first. It does. However you define it, every government generally would agree with that. You got to get from here to there in order to deliver public safety. You've got to get from here to there to deliver human services and support services and education. And, you know, I understand you have everybody. Well, obviously, we're with our communities of jurisdiction, but in general, this building has everybody coming before you to lobby on why what they're here to talk about is the most important. When we sit here and say there has to be a reality check on how do we prioritize the spending we already do and where we spend the money we already collect. Yet we support, in my opinion, we support that statement by all of these good questions. And I really, this is an important time. It's an important time for a whole lot of reasons, but it's an important time to try to level set the near and longer term future for transportation sustainability. If there's good news, we're not building a lot of new, sexy, expensive things. So it's a lot of it is maintaining the network we have, to your point, Rep. Walker. While I've been sitting here talking with you, everything outside's deteriorated already. It literally has. It's deteriorated further. You got a paved driveway, it's at home, it's deteriorated further, right? I mean, it is absolutely true. We're not in a business that reaches a status quo on anything. We're in a business that spends money every single year to maintain what we have. And yes, we have improvements, and that can buy us time in one spot, but then we've got to move to 10 other spots, right? So it's just a very complicated, but it's a very interesting circumstance. So I know today launches the in-depth testimony, all of my colleagues at the agency with you all. And I know that they have put an awful lot of work, as you've acknowledged, into this. It's clearly the as recommended budget. It's the governor's budget. We wholly support that, as you can imagine. And then we're open to, you know, the constructive dialogue that today launches.
Thank you. Unless anything else?
Sounds.
Or we're supposed to start back up with the next piece at 10:30?
I see the commissioner,
Then more, 10 minutes?
yeah, can you be back here in 10 minutes to move into your budget?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank